Live and in color from the NBC News radio broadcasting studios of KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, and 106.5 FM, located in beautiful Southern California, and in parallel from the Turf's Up radio studio in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Thanks for tuning in to the Water Zone Show this evening.
Good afternoon to everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are in this glorious world. Hope everybody's having a great time. I'm Rob Starr, and I'm going to be your host for the evening. And we have a great show coming up. We have a great featured guest, besides our wonderful guest, which is Miss Chris Austin from Maiden's Notebook, and she'll be on in a sec. And anyway, I hope everybody having a good week. Out here, I'm going to ask her how her weather is. And let me bring her and we'll start that conversation. So, Chris, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing okay.
So I heard you had... Okay. I heard you had some little rain trouble, and I had some rain trouble, and I didn't get the visibility problem here, but I'll tell you about that after you tell me your exciting news, which you were driving through the other day.
Yeah, I was driving across the Sierra Nevada mountains yesterday, from headed home to my place here in Chico, and we got hit with a massive rainstorm, just one of those drenching storms that, you have your windshield wipers going full on and you still can barely see ahead. So we're creeping up the freeway at 25 miles an hour, and the amount of rain just was just stunning. And I go 25 because it was so hard. The trucks went faster, and one truck went by me and hit a puddle and just totally drenched my car. I mean, I had to take the foot off the gas and wait because I just couldn't see nothing then. Finally got out of the rain, and there was a mudslide that I had to drive around, which was very difficult because I have a very small and low-to-the-ground car. But I made it through, but it was quite something. Up in Reno, I was up there I got up there on Sunday night. It rained, thunderstorms and rained every day I was there. And dumped on me as I was leaving, and got back here to the other side of the mountains where it was hot and dry and no rain at all. So,
well, I experienced what they call the Phoenix monsoon, or haboob is what they call it, and it was torrential rain, very strong winds. They had a dust storm. I forget the height of this thing. So it was traveling at 35 to 40 miles an hour. It looked like a tsunami wave, hundreds of feet tall, just sweeping across southeast Phoenix area. And we didn't get it out on the west portion of it, which was nice, but we did get the rains and the wind, and that was pretty vicious. It got soaked, and I don't know, it's really the first time I experienced that haboob. I've seen it before. I was watching television, and they showed Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, where there was like zero visibility. They were showing pictures of a jet trying to take off. You couldn't even see the lights blinking on it. It was just blacked out.
Yeah.
So that had to be a scary situation. And I also heard that I guess California may expect some of these things in the future.
Yes. Well, we have had dust storms similar to the haboobs around the Salton Sea area and sometimes in the Central Valley. But as climate change just continues to dry out our soils, we're probably going to get more of them. And there's been a lot of concern and a lot of articles over the past few months on dust in the Central Valley. There's just more dust around, and that has a lot of implications for, just the dust that lands on the crops. And we have valley fever, which is spores that are in that dust that can make some people very, very sick. And, when you have the dust storms, that soil that's flying in the air, you're losing soil. Not something you want to do. So it's a kind of going to be a feature, I think, on the landscape due to our drying climate, our hot and dry climate.
Well, I heard we got a new illegal invader to the country, screwworms.
Oh, screwworms! Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about them, but they say they came from Asia, and it's pretty nasty. It's starting to show up in Arizona and Texas and some other places. I don't know if California's got any
not yet, but they may be coming soon for that. The lots of fun invasive species. We have sea squirts as one of the new ones that we have now in California. Sea squirts. It sounds kind of like they're fun, right? But they're really gnarly little beasts that cover the floor of the ocean, and stamp everything out. So yeah.
So, it sounds like little kids in a pool taking a leak. with that name they came up with, pretty weird. So I've been reading some of your stuff. I read everything that you put out every morning. That's the first thing I do when I get up. We talk about dams that are aging and going bad, and they cost a lot.
Dam news. We got lots of dam news.
What's going on with these things?
Well, there are so many dams that have been built across the country over the years. We have a lot of dams in California. I think about 1,200, and there are probably other states that have a lot of dams too. Not all do. But there are dams all across the country, and a lot of these dams were built decades ago and haven't been maintained, and could be at risk for complications and possible failure. And to top it all off, there's not a lot of data on all the dams. You have as a state, you have a choice. If you have dams, you can have your own dam safety program if you want, or you can let the federal dam safety program handle your state. Well, California said we have 1,200 dams, so we're going to have our own dam safety program. And the dam safety program in California is considered one of the best that there is. There are a lot of states that just go with the federal dam safety program, and so as you can imagine, there's not nearly the oversight for a lot of these dams. So the Hearst Television has done a study, and they mapped all of these dams across the country that are in poor or worse condition, ready for failure. And if you look, there's a lot of dams in the eastern stations. So there's just a lot of dams that are in unsatisfactory conditions. So this is going to be a challenge. We have a lot of infrastructure that is aging and old and needs to be updated. Think bridges too. We've had bridge problems. So.
Well, I know reading that report, it says like over more than 60 dams in California are considered to be in poor condition to the analysis, but then they say those 40 are also classified as high hazard or extremely high hazard, which means if they were to fall, it's going to cause, significant loss of life and economic or environmental damage. And so, when going back to your statement about the state or the federal stuff with the dams, how does that affect their insurance?
Oh, I have no idea. I think FEMA may have incorporate dams into their analysis for flood risk, perhaps. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm looking at the map here they have of the country of all the dams, and California doesn't look too bad, but if you look in Wyoming, just about every dam. Well, I don't know how many dams there are in Wyoming, but they seem to have the most. I'm sorry, that's not Wyoming. It's Colorado has a lot of dams that are considered high risk. Texas and Minnesota. So there's this is going to be a problem, and what we really need to do is we need to be looking at these dams and fixing them, but that takes money and that takes time and it takes expertise. So I'm not sure how much that's going to happen.
Well, if we go like everything else, we won't know for another 10 to 20 years.
Yes. Well, the average dam, they say, is 64 years old. So,
Wow.
Yeah. But, there will be one less dam in California, though, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about one of the dams, Pacheco Dam, which would have been a dam outside of San Jose. It's one of the reservoir projects that's in the Water Storage Investment Program that the state of California has been working on for the last 10 years. And this dam had a lot of problems. We talked about this a few weeks ago. They wanted to build it in one area, and then they did the geotech evaluations, and they realized they couldn't, so they moved the location. And and all of this is increasing the cost of the reservoir. It was already very costly. And the Bureau of Reclamation sort of dealt the death card to the project because as the contractor, the San Jose Water District, wanted to store, excuse me, folks, I have a bit of a cold, wanted to store water from the Central Valley project in the reservoir, but Bureau of Reclamation said no. We're not interested in this project. We're not going to let you store Central Valley project water in it, and maybe you could store state water project in it, another source of water for the district. But they said that's going to take a lot of time. But basically, not being able to store the Central Valley project water in the reservoir sort of dealt the death card to the project. But it's a very costly project, and it was one that the ratepayers would have had to pay for, which would have been a substantial increase on their water bills. It's very expensive reservoir, very expensive reservoir. So, so that's another project that drops out of the program. So that means now that the California Water Commission has even more funds to figure out how to distribute between the remaining programs. So we'll see how this goes. Legislatively, it's a little tough because when they wrote the legislation for the Water Storage Investment Program, they set up things very, very specifically, and we passed some Prop 4 a year ago, I think, and that had additional funds for the projects in the program, but what they didn't really contemplate is what happens if these projects start dropping off because they're not feasible to be built, and what happens with that money now that it's returned, it never left, but now it's unallocated now, I guess is the word.
Wow. Well, there's another thing that's going on, and I'm not as close to that as you are. I'm going to ask you about this Prop 218 on impacts for the California water. Can you give us a little synopsis of what's happening with that?
Prop 218 was passed, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, and it's really been a problem for water agencies or any agency that's trying to build a project that they're going to bill their ratepayers for. And what the law says is that you can't charge a project to a customer's bill unless that customer is going to directly benefit from that project. So that makes a lot of things really hard because in the water world, sometimes we do a project in one place to free up water for another place. But if you can't spread that cost over the cost of your utility, then it makes it very hard to build projects. And there is a very robust process where property owners can reject the project. And so we had a groundwater agency in the Central Valley
now joining.
that had a Prop 218 challenge to the money that it was trying to charge to cover, the operation of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And the property owners turned it down. So, now how does that agency proceed and do what it's mandated to do, which is manage the groundwater if you don't have much funds? And, this may be one of the cases where those property owners shoot themselves in the foot, because if the groundwater agency fails, then the state water board comes in. And when the state water board comes in, there are substantial fees that everyone will have to pay while that's happening. So, it's a big concern, and it's one that's kind of hard to overcome. Some water agencies have been able to do a really good job of explaining the project to their ratepayers and why they need to do this project. And so it's possible if you can win over your constituents, with a good, if you can educate them and make them understand how it will benefit them, you can get it done. But it's very tough. It's kind of a bit of a high bar, and sometimes you can get people that oppose projects that are very good at derailing projects and whipping up, homeowners or property owners, with maybe not exactly correct information, or, people can tank projects pretty easily. So it's a challenge. And Prop 218 was actually one of those ballot propositions that it was like written into the Constitution. So it's really, really hard to change.
Well, everything's always hard to change once they start changing it to begin with. It makes it kind of hassle. I know you had one other story I thought would touch me, which is pretty interesting, is some commentary about housing abundance in California. And one gentleman named Jim Wunderman, who's president and CEO of the Bay Area Council, said, the state has a housing crisis, and to make any progress on building more housing, we need to concurrently make progress on water. And, part of the issue, they protect the water. They already have California's largest freshwater system, the State Water Project, but that's threatened by catastrophic collapse from earthquakes in the San Juan Delta. So what do you see with that's going to happen?
Well, so this is why they're trying to build the very controversial Delta Conveyance Project. And so this is basically a commentary where he's pointing out why we should build the Delta Conveyance Project. Which, I think well, we've been arguing about this for decades now, and we'll see if this project ever gets built. But this would bypass the Delta and get that water, delivered to the pumps and to the rest of the state. But that's wherein the controversy lies, because the people in the Delta are very worried that if you're taking the water out before it gets into the Delta, that the water quality in the Delta is just going to go very bad. We'll starve to fresh water, and what that will do for the fish and the ecosystem, there. Now, the state, of course, says that we're not going to take that much water, and actually their operations plan is that they only would turn the tunnels on or turn the system on when we're having rain and high flows from precipitation, in the Sacramento River. But the people that live in the Delta say, well, you're going to spend all that money for that tunnel and you're telling us you're not going to use it that much. They kind of don't believe that. Mm. So it's a very controversial project. He also argued for some other things in his commentary to need to capture and create more water. So that's like stormwater, using stormwater, floodmar, groundwater recharge, and he suggests considering housing needs into regulatory decision making. Water agencies and the counties. The county is in charge of land use, and the water agency is in charge of delivering water. They don't really talk a lot to each other, especially on the on these upcoming projects. So, there's always a bit of a disconnect between land use and the water district that would provide water to that property.
Right. No, I understand that. We got the same problem out here in Phoenix with this new properties they're trying to develop with Howard Hughes Corporation to build 100,000 more homes. And that's going to be a challenge with the water, but we'll see. I know it's the Chris Davey story that he would like to hear, but, this invasive golden mussels in California, I guess these things spread over 350 miles already.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they have.
What can be done about them? I mean, you can't eat them, right?
Oh, no. They're just very prolific breeders. The main problem with the golden mussels now really goes to the recreational boaters and watercraft owners, because if you take your boat and you use it in an infected water, you're gonna get mussel larvae in your boat, and if you don't dry it out and clean it carefully before you go into the next body of water, you can spread the mussels. It doesn't take much to get these golden mussels going. One boat with a dirty boat would do it in any lake of any size, because all it needs is one or two, a handful, and they're off to the races. So if you're out, boating, and really anywhere in the country, California is one. We talk a lot about invasive species, but it's a problem across the country. So if you're a recreational boater, you really need to be cleaning and drying your equipment before you go from one, into another water body. Even if you don't think where you were was infected with anything, you should still do it, because you just don't know.
Yeah. It's going to be a big problem around California, and like you said, the rest of the country. Well, Chris, we appreciate you coming on every single week and giving us the latest in the water news. And to our listeners, as I say every single week, go to mavensnotebook.com, become a subscriber, get all the latest and free news before the rest of the world gets it, and get it from her. And again, I don't know how she does it. I can't believe how many hours it takes you to do this, and it's just you, and it's amazing. And there's a lot of good things on her website, and things about what new books are out with Justin Scott Coe. It's good information, and other challenges that you can read about. And if you would like to become a sponsor of that, she's more than welcome to take that. So the same thing, go to mavensnotebook.com and become a sponsor as well. It's a great read every single morning. So Chris, thank you very much. I hope it doesn't get more rainy in your area out there. And but if it does, just pull over and wait for it all to be over before you continue to drive, because we love you here on this show, and we appreciate that. So thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
All right. We're going to be back. We're going to take a little break for our commercial sponsors, and then we'll be back with a super segment on something that I really like, and it's called Biosphere 2. So stick around with that. It's going to be an interesting conversation. We'll be right back.
KCAA Loma Linda is sponsored by Teamsters Local 1932, protecting the future of working families. Teamsters 1932.org.
Water is one of the biggest expenses for communities, HOAs, universities, golf courses, and resorts. So keeping those costs under control, especially when rates are increasing while water supplies are being reduced, are often essential to a customer's survival. Managing water requires multiple skills, which is why it's been complicated and difficult until now. AquaTrack brings multiple skills and technologies together to help large system users conserve outdoor water and improve the health of their landscapes. AquaTrack's professionals are certified landscape water managers and certified landscape irrigation auditors. The company offers audit services, upgrade advice, technical expertise, and water use monitoring. We already manage irrigation water for the largest homeowner associations in Arizona, and we're prepared to bring our knowledge and experience to help others, including landscapers and designers. Give us a call and hear how AquaTrack saved one HOA some 430 million gallons of water and $200,000 in annual water expenses. AquaTrack is Arizona-based, and you can reach us at 623-594-8689. That's 623-594-8689.
One of the most time-saving tools I found for my customers is our app and our e-commerce feature. So customers actually have the ability to view all of their quotes in one place. If you contact your Site One seller, you'll be able to log into your account and see all your quotes in one place. And instead of jumping on the phone or waiting for your seller to call you back, you can approve it right from the website, and it will send a message to your sales rep to get it on order and reserve the material. Customers can learn more about these tools at their Site One branch, from their local seller, from their local CX specialist, and from SiteOne.com or by downloading the Site One app.
Back to the second half of the Water Zone. Thanks for joining today. Appreciate everybody calling in and doing things on the message board. That'd be great. I'm very excited right now. I talked to this gentleman about a week or so ago, and I'm super impressed by it for two reasons. One, his name is John Adams. He's the Deputy Director, Chief Operating Officer for what's called Biosphere 2 at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And I got more familiar with that because my granddaughter started her second year at U of A, and I've told her, since I'm not that far from her, that I want to come down one weekend and stay over, and I want to take her and me and go on and Grandma, my wife, on the tour of this thing. It just fascinates me to think about biospheres. And so I want to bring on this gentleman. We're going to have a great conversation, and it's Mr. John Adams. John, welcome to the Water Zone.
Thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to sharing everything I know about Biosphere 2.
It's awesome. Before we do that, though, can you tell us, our listening audience, how you got started in your career, and how did you get to your current position into the Biosphere project?
Well, for me, I feel really fortunate. I'm an alum of the University of Arizona, and was doing a lot of field research. They had an opening at Biosphere 2 when it was actually managed by Columbia University. So this was nearly 30 years ago. So my entire career has been spent at Biosphere 2. But I actually started as a research intern. I was doing database access, data visualization, and as they say, I sort of worked my way up from the mailroom to my current role. And I feel really fortunate. I was never put in a box, and had to do the same thing day in and day out. I was given a lot of latitude, and I was able to actually take advantage of those opportunities, and it just allowed me to grow into my current position.
It sounds, after talking to you the other day, it just sounds like such a cool job, a little different than what I do, but I would love it. What's the history behind the Biosphere 2? I assume there was a Biosphere 1?
There is. So Biosphere 1 is Earth, and Biosphere 2 was originally modeled after Earth itself. And so the original designers and conceivers of Biosphere 2 saw an opportunity to recreate Earth systems so that they could better understand them. They recognized that Earth was infinitely complex, and that if we were going to sort of get our hands around how some of these systems function, we would need to potentially scale them down. And that's exactly what they did. So in 1987, they broke ground on what is Biosphere 2 today. It covers a little over 3 acres. It's about 7.2 million cubic feet. So I know it's kind of hard to imagine that volume, but it's equivalent to about 84 Olympic-sized pools. And their objective was to try to capture some of these complex biological systems that you find on Earth inside of this completely sealed environment. And in doing so, they had hoped that those systems would provide all the necessary components that we oftentimes take for granted outside for the 8 people that were going to be sealed inside this facility. So it took them 4 years to build, and in September of 1991, they sealed Biosphere 2 with 8 people inside, and they embarked on a 2-year journey. And I think a lot of people have probably read about it, heard about it. There's actually a documentary that's called Spaceship Earth. That's definitely worth a watch, especially if you're interested in this facility and structure. But as you would imagine, no one had ever done anything like this. And when you do something for the first time, you're going to encounter challenges. It was an experiment. And again, for all those who are listening, you oftentimes will hear people refer to things that don't go as well as they had planned, especially experiments, as failures. But I come from the research background. I know there's probably a lot of scientists and researchers that are listening here, and there's no such thing as a failed experiment. In fact, we do experiments because we don't know what's going to happen. And so this was the world's largest controlled environment that was created to allow for people to live inside and see if they could survive. And remarkably, they did make it the 2 years. Now, some of the challenges that they faced is, if I took 8 of us and stuck us in a facility like Biosphere 2, and we were dependent on one another for every part of our existence, as you could imagine, there would probably be some disagreements from time to time. So they didn't get along as well as I think they had hoped. They put a very rich soil in the agricultural area and in the rainforest, and they had hoped that this soil would support the intensive growth of plants that they had anticipated. Now, it did do that, and it did a remarkable job, but in this agricultural space, of the 3 acres that is Biosphere 2, about a half acre was dedicated to their agricultural practice, very traditional soil-based agriculture. And although they were nutritionally okay, they were always calorie deficit. So they just couldn't produce enough food to support the 8 people and the calories that they needed for these 12, 14, 16-hour days that they were putting in just to try to make it. And then finally, sort of the thing that is most widely publicized is oxygen began to go down. So from day 1 to about day 500 of this 2-year stay inside, oxygen dropped down to 14.2%. And the management and the team made a decision, okay, this is getting too low. We need to add oxygen back in for the health and safety of those 8 people sealed inside. And so they did it. But in my opinion, what they didn't do is they weren't forthcoming with the fact that they had to do this. And this project was very widely publicized. There were a lot of eyes on it. And they didn't even tell the person who was handling their press relations. And so she denied when inquiries were made if they had to make this addition. And then they had to retract some of those statements. And when you do those types of things, it's very difficult to recover, as we all know. And so, but that actually allowed for a complete scientific shift in how the facility was going to be used.
I imagine, when the U.S. talks about going to Mars and setting up a station, it's going to kind of, I would assume it may be modular. I'm sure it will be modular in construction, but I'm sure it's going to be, pretty much everything that you guys are doing there, but in a different type of scale. Like, how do you get the water to begin with? How do you now you can simulate lighting, you can simulate thunder and rain and humidity and temperature. That's easy to do. Water is a different thing. And I guess what strategies did you use or do they use to manage the biodiversity in a controlled environment like that? It's got to be so diverse. I can't even imagine the start. Like you said, you find out more things, and I agree with you. It's not a loss if something didn't work or if something failed. You learn from that. That's what makes it a success. But I'm sure if the same technology...
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. And that's exactly the point that I make to the kids who visit Biosphere 2 and those in the media that we often have an opportunity to talk to, is that it was an overwhelming success. And I think fundamentally, you're right. I mean, a lot of what they're doing today is what we imagine we're going to need to have when we go to Mars. And actually, that was one of their objectives. They wanted to be, in a sense, like the Halliburtons of space. And that was one of their business models. But at their core was to understand Earth systems. And to manage that biodiversity, what they quickly determined is that it's not too difficult, relative, to grow the flora. But now when you add in fauna, all of these different types of animals, and you add higher order vertebrates, so you add reptiles and amphibians and fish, that it requires a tremendous amount of space. And if you want all of those organisms to not be dependent on you for food, but to be dependent on the system you've created, you quickly realize that you just don't have enough space to have a lot of complex organisms. So when they originally planted Biosphere 2, they had a large number of plants. They did have insects, but from there, it was pretty limited on things like reptiles and amphibians. They did have a small primate that they introduced in. It was called a galago, and it was intended really more as a sort of a companion for the 8 people that were living inside, our companions. There were several of them that were added. But as far as birds, there were a few, but not many. And there are fish in the ocean and some of our other aquatic systems, but those numbers are pretty limited. And they quickly recognized that they couldn't do it. In fact, they were looking at, okay, we want to have bats. And so they created a little cave in the desert. They thought, oh, this is a great place where the bats can hang out. But when they actually started to do the research on how many insect encounters a bat has to have every night to survive, there was no way that they would be able to achieve that. They added bees inside. And what ended up happening is the glass structure that makes up Biosphere 2's skin actually cuts out all UVA and UVB. And so these bees all migrated to the southern half of Biosphere 2, or southern end, that's the desert, and they were not able to navigate because there wasn't that UV spectrum inside. And so they all perished. So these are all things that they learned. But again, it was more about Earth systems and less about becoming an interplanetary species. Are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, my mic got hit by my hand.
Okay.
I just
I
saw
thought
that.
maybe I got cut off there.
No, my mistake. I got to imagine the engineering, whether it's mechanical, electronic, agriculture. I can go down the list. How to participate in this thing to understand it all, and basically, like you said, it's ongoing research, because you know more every single day. You learn something about that. I used to tell engineers my 2 things I coined in my history. I tell them, in God we trust. All others bring data, and I want to see accurate data when I see that. And every time, they say, well, I can't do this, or we can't do this. It's too far out of the, if you think about something, you can create it. I always say, you can't walk on water if you don't get out of the boat. And you got to try different experiments and different methodologies and new things that you never knew would work, but you got to try it just to eliminate it to see, and maybe it does. I find it really interesting as an engineer. I read something about a medical thing where they're trying to cure cancer, and some biologists discovered that if you go to a yellow frog in somewhere in Africa, and how did he know to go find a yellow frog in the first place? You know, you stumble across all of that stuff. So it's pretty interesting. How do you monitor and maintain the ecological balance within the biosphere? There must be a rash of computers, and is AI going to play a big important factor in this going forward?
Well, AI is actually one of our newest and biggest initiatives. But taking a step back, when we look at Biosphere 2 today, you know, I am often asked, well, what's
Hello? Hello?
Oh, sorry about that. I hit the mute. So,
Me too. We're equal now.
Yeah, one of the most important lessons that was learned from Biosphere 2 is just how infinitely complex Earth systems are. And no matter how smart we think we are, we're never going to be able to recreate Earth in its entirety. And so today, Biosphere 2 is no longer run as a sealed environment, and we use it to understand how some of these more complex Earth systems are going to respond to changes like changes in moisture getting drier, or increases in atmospheric CO2, or increases in temperature. And the way in which we monitor those systems is not unlike what we do outside. So we have arrays of sensors that look at the temperature and the humidity and the light level. We do that at different levels within the structure. Because, for example, the rainforest is about 144 feet on a side, and it's nearly 91 feet tall in its center point. So we need to understand what's going on, for example, in that area. Our ocean, that is about 1 million gallons of water, of salt water, contained inside the facility. It's 21 feet deep on the far end, and has been the site of some really significant research on corals and their resiliency and survivability under future conditions. And that's really Biosphere 2. Biosphere 2, think of it as a time machine for researchers. If you think that something's going to happen in the future to our systems, then you can actually come in and do that change before it happens, and look at, you know, how well do these mathematical models that we use to predict what may happen, how accurate do they actually forecast what's going to happen inside Biosphere 2? And if they don't, how do we need to tune them? And that's where AI comes into play. Is today, you know, this notion of what they call digital twinning. I really think of digital twins as a fancy way of saying a model. But the digital twin today takes into consideration machine learning, artificial intelligence, but it really takes this sort of bi-directional flow of data. What we'd like to do is create an exact replica, virtually, of Biosphere 2's, for example, tropical rainforest. And the data that's coming out of it feeds into the model. And once we've got everything tuned right, then you can actually create multiple digital twins where you can run simulations, and you have a high confidence because your original model behaves just like that of the actual system. And so then you can go ahead and do treatments, because that's one of the challenges of Biosphere 2 and one of our challenges with our ecological systems. It's an N of one. There's a sample size of one. It's small. And even when you step outside into the natural environment, replicating things is very difficult. And so this is one way that we can potentially replicate when we only have small sample sizes and make predictions of what's going to happen. And we've done those exact things.
So let's assume, you know, that government's going to go to Mars someday. And I guess they're still prepared. They're starting to prepare for that. They have to bring a lot of stuff to start this, correct? I mean, even if it was on the moon first, how are they going to get water? They have to haul water there first, right? There's no water on the moon that I know of. And then the animals and the bees and all the reptiles, they're not there, so you got to bring them. And then I guess to me it's interesting to understand how would they be able to ensure the sustainability of the food production in the biosphere. Like you said, you can make experiments and see what's going to happen under different conditions than a normal one, but they got to schlep a lot of stuff up there to start this thing. And like you said, with the oxygen problem and things of that sort, there's got to be a lot of safety factors built into this. There's got to be a lot of backup systems, I would think, to it doesn't take a 2-hour ride up the spaceship to get to those planets. So how is that figured in what you guys are doing? Because I'm sure that somebody's going to take a look at the technology that you've worked on and experiments and utilize some of that.
Yeah, I mean, so if we're going to become an interplanetary species, and going to the moon, I have no doubt we're going to be able to put boots back on the moon. And I think that we'll get to Mars, but Mars is going to take you about a year. And I think what most people recognize is that we're not going to recreate Earth on any one of these other planets. I think it's very arrogant of us to think that we're going to terraform a planet.
Right.
We may be able to take some of these fundamental processes, like we may be able to grow plants hydroponically on Mars, for example, or the moon if we can figure out how we're going to get water. But taking Earth and all of its systems out of our atmosphere and onto another planet, that's not going to happen, in my opinion. And that's why I think the research that we're doing today is so critically important, because no matter how far we look into space with these very sophisticated telescopes, we've yet to find a planet that was going to be hospitable for us. Everything is going to require us to have very sophisticated suits to be able to survive, on the surfaces of those planets. And even just getting there and getting out of our solar system is not a trivial matter. And so although we can advance and learn a tremendous amount what we're going to do, looking here on Earth, I think is where, Biosphere 2's research is going to be most beneficial. I know it's not always as cool to talk about it, because talking about Mars and going back to the moon is amazing to think about. But for the overwhelming majority of us, for your grandchildren, for my daughter, for eventually my grandchildren and my great grandchildren, we want to leave Earth in a sort of a better state, or at least a state that's going to be comparable to what we have today. We don't want it to get worse, and I think we need to be able to provide better predictive tools so that we know what challenges we're going to face, and that allows us to potentially adapt. Because if we can't adapt, we know what happens. We don't survive.
Right. What in the time that people were living inside, what type systems were in place for, say, water recycling and management? How did that happen? Because you're only limited to what you get in that one location. It's not like you can. How does that work?
Yeah, so originally Biosphere 2's water cycle was internal, and much like the system that you have on Earth, relative. So what would happen is they started out, with about 300,000 gallons of water inside Biosphere 2. And if anybody's seen a picture of Biosphere 2, on the southern end, there's a structure, a geodesic dome, and that one's called the South Lung. And that South Lung, there's about a 200,000 gallon, think of it as a sump. And then there's holding tanks throughout Biosphere 2. And what they would do is they started out with a finite amount. You can imagine the crops are going to need water. You're going to get evaporation out of the ocean. You're going to need to add some water back into it, or the mangrove system. And so anytime there was those types of needs, they would pump that water from the South Lung Central Reservoir. They would run it through reverse osmosis, and then they put it in holding tanks. And they would add rain to the rainforest or make up water to the ocean. For the people who were living inside, we have large air handling units. And so these units circulate and condition air inside. They use a large radiator coil. You run water through that coil, but it's on a closed loop, so it never comes in contact with the environment inside Biosphere 2, and you run a hot water or chilled water. And so when you run warm, moist air over a cool coil, you're going to condense water out of the atmosphere, especially with the high humidity that's typically found inside Biosphere 2. So that condensate water is what the biospherians, those 8 people who lived inside, would use to drink. And so they would recycle their water, and then they did try to do some bioremediation. But remember, this is 35 years ago. And so initially the ability to, clean, the technologies and sort of the advancements that we have today were not available then. And so although they tried to do some bioremediation, it never ultimately produced potable water that they could drink. And so it was used as irrigation on their agricultural crops. Again, condensate was used for their drinking and cooking purposes, and then RO water this reverse osmosis was used to rain on the systems inside. And so although they were very conscious about how much water they used, they never ran out of water or were in danger of running out of water.
In the atmosphere inside the biosphere, I know this technology, I wouldn't say it's relatively new, it's been out for about 10, 15 years, on atmosphere water harvesting. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where it collects stuff out of, could something like that be utilized inside?
Yeah, I think so. It could be used. The water is trapped inside the facility when it's run as a closed environment or sealed environment, as it was originally designed. So it's not going anywhere. So you can collect it, and they did, where they would focus. So the glass ceiling, as that water vapor rose, hit it, condensed on it, they would collect that because it would run down into central channels and then into troughs, so they could collect that. Yes, you could use water harvesting, our atmospheric water harvesting equipment or technologies inside. But I think, overall, they did a pretty good job at conserving water so that they never ran out once they had that initial stock.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What do you believe, or is the greatest challenge that you had on that project so far?
I think the greatest challenge for them was hubris. They thought that they would be able to do everything, and I think it was a very much a humbling experience when I talked with one of the guys I first started working with when I started at Biosphere 2 he's a really well-known desert ecologist. His name's Tony Burgess. Unfortunately, he recently passed. But what he said is they got all the world's experts together, and they thought with the sheer size of Biosphere 2, they could pretty easily assemble these systems inside and make a pretty good go at having them work. He said, we had no idea really what we were doing and how complex and difficult that effort would be. And he said it was very humbling for them because they began to realize just how complex these systems are outside and how little we truly know and understand them, and that recreating them is difficult. But this tool was recognized because you can trace molecule by molecule where things are going. And that is truly unique, and it's at a scale that we don't get in a laboratory, but yet we have a lot of the control capabilities that you have in a laboratory, but at somewhat of a field scale. Because when you step outside into the natural environment, most of the time you're subject to just making observations and trying to determine the change that you see. For example, is that because I saw an increase in temperature, or because we're in a drought, or because we had more water? And those things are they're difficult to pull them apart. Inside Biosphere 2, we can separate variables in ways that you can't do outside of the environment, and at a scale that you don't get in a traditional laboratory.
Yep. People, our listeners, know where to get to you and the Biosphere. You're still doing tours, is that correct?
Yeah, we have. We're owned and operated today by the University of Arizona. First and foremost, we're a research facility, and we're one of a kind. But we do welcome visitors on a daily basis. And so, if you're interested in visiting, go to www.biosphere2.org. We've got information on our research objectives and efforts. We've got information on how you visit and tour. If people are just interested and they can't make it to Biosphere 2, which we would love them to do, go to the Apple App Store or Google Play, and you can download an app that will take you through a lot of the areas inside Biosphere 2. And there's no geofencing, so you can do it regardless of where you are. And for those of you who have children, we have a K-12 app. And so it's the Biosphere 2 K-12 app or the Biosphere 2 Experience. Both of them are available on Apple and Google, and they're great ways to learn more about Biosphere 2. And then, hopefully we'll have you come out and visit, because there's nothing like seeing it in person.
Well, I definitely am going to do that. John, it was a pleasure talking to you last week and also today. And I'm so infatuated by that project and what it can do. And it sounds like the coolest job in the world. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking the time to come on the Water Zone. We appreciate that very, very much. And you keep on doing the work you're doing, and hopefully maybe one day I'll get to meet you in person. And that'll be awesome.
I look forward to that. Yeah, I look forward to that, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay. Everybody, John Adams, he's Deputy Director, Chief Operating Officer for the Biosphere 2 at University of Arizona. Go down and take a look at it. I've read a bunch about it. I want to go see it in person, and I got 10,000 more questions, but we'll save that for another show. Thank you very much for listening in. Remember, the most important thing that Chris Davey and I always say every week is please help keep your planet green. Because if you like green, you got to have blue. So take care of that water. Talk to you next week. Have a good weekend.
KCAA